Every morning before sunrise, a small woman named Clara walked through the cold streets carrying an old gray bag and a worn cleaning cloth. Most people in the city never noticed her. She moved quietly, keeping her eyes low as if she did not want attention from anyone. The weather was often harsh, but she never complained. Rain or snow, she still walked the same road every day toward the Grand Music Academy standing in the center of the city. The academy was famous for producing talented musicians. Rich families sent their children there from different places because the school had some of the best music teachers in the country. The building itself looked more like a palace than a school. Tall white walls, shining glass windows, and large golden doors made it impossible to ignore. But Clara never walked through the front entrance. Every morning, she entered through the small side door near the storage room. The guards barely looked at her anymore. To them, she was simply the cleaning woman who arrived before everyone else and left after dark. The halls were always silent when she first arrived. Clara liked those quiet moments. She slowly pushed her cleaning cart through the empty corridors while soft sunlight entered through the windows. Sometimes she paused for a moment and looked at the framed pictures hanging on the walls. They showed famous musicians smiling proudly beside expensive pianos and orchestras. Students dreamed of becoming like them one day. Clara would quietly smile at the pictures before returning to work. She cleaned every room carefully, but her favorite place was always the grand piano hall. The room was huge, with bright lights hanging from the ceiling and rows of red seats facing the stage. In the middle stood a beautiful black piano that looked almost magical under the lights. Most people only saw it as an instrument. Clara looked at it differently. Whenever she entered the hall alone, her eyes softened. She dusted the piano gently, almost as if she were afraid of hurting it. Her fingers sometimes paused over the keys for a few seconds before she quickly pulled her hand away. It was the only moment during the day when she looked truly peaceful. One morning, while cleaning the stage, she quietly pressed a single piano key. The soft sound echoed through the empty hall. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Then another key followed. A slow melody began filling the room. It was soft and emotional, almost like someone remembering an old memory they could never forget. Her fingers moved naturally even though she kept looking nervously toward the door. She stopped the second she heard footsteps. A young student entered carrying music books under his arm. Clara quickly stepped away from the piano and grabbed her cleaning cloth. The boy looked surprised. "Did you just play that?" he asked. Clara shook her head quickly. "No, I was only cleaning." The student frowned slightly because he knew what he heard. But before he could ask more questions, another student called him from outside the hall, and he left. Clara released a quiet breath and returned to work. That was how most days passed for her. Invisible, quiet, forgotten. The teachers barely greeted her. Some students were polite, but many ignored her completely. A few even acted annoyed whenever they saw her cleaning nearby during practice sessions. One afternoon, several teachers gathered inside the piano hall while students prepared for an upcoming competition. The academy was under pressure because an important music director was coming the following month to watch the school's best performers. Everyone seemed stressed. One teacher kept shouting at a nervous student who missed a few notes during practice. "Again!" he snapped angrily. "You call that piano playing?" The poor student tried again, but his hands shook badly. Clara quietly cleaned the back rows while listening. Another teacher noticed her nearby and rolled his eyes. "Can you finish later?" he asked coldly. "You're distracting everyone." "I'm sorry," Clara answered softly. She quickly moved toward the exit with her cart. As she left, she heard one of the teachers mutter under his breath, "This place is becoming crowded with workers instead of talent." A few students laughed quietly. Clara pretended not to hear it, but the words still hurt. Outside the hall, she stopped near a window and stared down at the busy street below. For a moment, sadness filled her eyes. Still, she took a deep breath and continued working like nothing had happened. By evening, the academy became quieter again. Most students had gone home, and only a few teachers remained inside their offices. Clara entered the piano hall one last time to clean before leaving. The stage lights were off except for one small lamp near the piano. She slowly walked closer. The giant room felt peaceful again. Without thinking much, she sat carefully on the piano bench. For several seconds, she simply stared at the keys. Then her fingers moved. A beautiful melody slowly filled the hall, stronger this time. The music carried deep emotion, sadness, hope, and something impossible to explain with words. It did not sound like the playing of an amateur. It sounded like someone who had spent a lifetime speaking through music. Clara forgot where she was for a moment. The world outside disappeared. The years of pain, struggle, and loneliness seemed to pour out through every note. But she did not know someone was listening. Near the half-open door stood an older teacher named Victor. He had returned to collect some papers from his office when he heard the music. At first, he thought one of the academy's best students was practicing late at night. But when he looked inside, confusion covered his face. The cleaning woman sat at the piano. Victor stared in disbelief. He watched quietly for nearly a minute before finally speaking. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Clara froze instantly. Her hands stopped moving. She turned pale as she stood up quickly from the bench. I'm sorry," she whispered nervously. Victor walked closer, still shocked. "That piece was difficult," he said. "Very difficult." Clara lowered her eyes. "I shouldn't have touched the piano." Victor crossed his arms. "Answer the question." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then Clara quietly said, "I learned many years ago." Victor studied her face carefully. Something about her expression felt heavy, like she carried years of hidden pain. Before he could ask anything else, voices echoed from the hallway as several teachers approached. Victor stepped back. Clara immediately grabbed her cleaning supplies again. The other teachers entered the hall laughing about something, but they stopped when they noticed Clara standing near the piano. One of them smirked. "What's this?" he asked jokingly. "Preparing for a concert?" Several teachers chuckled. Clara stayed silent. Victor looked at her thoughtfully but said nothing. Another teacher laughed and pointed toward the piano. "Maybe we should let her perform at the competition." Imagine the audience's faces. More laughter followed. Clara forced a small smile even though embarrassment burned inside her. "I was only cleaning," she said softly. "Of course," the teacher replied sarcastically. The group continued laughing while walking away. Victor remained quiet. Before leaving, he glanced once more at Clara. She kept her head down until everyone disappeared from the hall. Only then did she slowly sit in the empty front row seats. The giant room suddenly felt colder than before. For years, she had hidden her past from the world. She never wanted attention, never wanted questions. Life had already taken too much from her, and music was the one memory she could never fully escape. Still, when her fingers touched those piano keys, something inside her came alive again. Something she had spent years trying to bury. Clara looked toward the silent piano standing alone under the dim light. And deep inside, she feared her secret would not stay hidden much longer. The next morning, Clara arrived at the academy earlier than usual. The streets were still dark, and cold wind moved through the empty sidewalks. She held her old coat tightly around herself while walking toward the side entrance of the music academy. But something felt different. For years, nobody had really noticed her. She cleaned rooms, emptied trash bins, and quietly disappeared into the background. Yet after the previous night, she could not stop thinking about the older teacher who had caught her playing the piano. The memory stayed in her mind the entire walk to work. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His words repeated over and over inside her head. Clara pushed the thought away as she unlocked the storage room and prepared her cleaning cart. She told herself it did not matter. Soon everyone would forget about it. At least that was what she hoped. The academy slowly became busy as students started arriving for morning classes. Young musicians rushed through the halls carrying violins, notebooks, and music sheets. Some looked sleepy while others practiced finger movements in the air while walking. Clara cleaned quietly as always, but a strange feeling followed her everywhere that morning. A few students glanced at her longer than usual, Two girls standing near the stairs whispered while looking in her direction. Even one of the piano teachers briefly stared at her before entering a classroom. Clara lowered her eyes and continued wiping the windows. Around midday, she entered the main piano hall to clean between rehearsals. Several students were already inside practicing for the academy competition. Their music echoed loudly across the room. The older teacher, Victor, stood near the stage listening carefully. When he noticed Clara entering with her cleaning supplies, he paused for a moment. Their eyes met briefly. Clara quickly looked away. Victor did not say anything, but his expression showed he had not forgotten what happened last night. One student suddenly groaned after making another mistake during practice. "This piece is impossible," he complained. Another student laughed nervously. "The judges will destroy us if we play like this." Victor folded his arms. "Then practice harder." As the students prepared to start again, one of the younger teachers walked into the hall carrying coffee. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I heard our cleaning lady is secretly a piano genius now." Several students laughed instantly. Clara froze near the back row. Victor frowned slightly. "That's enough." But the younger teacher only smirked. "Come on, I'm joking." He looked directly at Clara. "Maybe you should give lessons to the students. Perhaps they'll finally improve." More laughter filled the hall. Clara forced herself to keep cleaning even though embarrassment burned inside her chest. One student whispered loudly, "Can she actually play?" Another replied, "Probably just knows one song." The younger teacher suddenly clapped his hands dramatically. "Well, there's only one way to find out." Clara immediately shook her head before he could even continue. "No," she said softly. "I need to finish cleaning." But the teacher was already enjoying the attention. "Just a small performance," he said with a mocking smile. "It will entertain everyone before rehearsal." Several students laughed again. Clara gripped the cleaning cloth tightly in her hands. Victor stepped forward. "Leave her alone." But now the students had become curious. "Please play something," one student called out. "Yes," another added. "Just one song." Clara's heart started beating faster. This was exactly the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. She looked toward the piano sitting under the stage lights. For a second, old memories flashed through her mind. Crowded concert halls, bright lights, nervous hands before performances. Then painful memories followed. Loss, loneliness, silence. She quickly looked away. "I can't," she whispered. The younger teacher laughed lightly. "See? I told you." Victor probably heard a few lucky notes and imagined the rest. A few students chuckled again. Victor's expression hardened, but he remained quiet. Clara turned to leave the hall, hoping the moment would finally end. Then one careless comment stopped her. "People should know their place," the younger teacher muttered while sipping coffee. The words were not shouted loudly, but Clara heard them clearly. The room became quiet for a second. Even some students looked uncomfortable after hearing it. Clara slowly stopped walking. Her back remained turned toward everyone. For years, she had accepted insults in silence. Life had already humbled her enough that she no longer argued with cruel people. But something about those words reached deeply into old wounds she had tried to forget. People should know their place. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Then, without saying a word, she placed her cleaning cloth on a chair and slowly walked toward the piano. The students immediately became silent. Even the younger teacher looked surprised. Clara sat carefully on the bench. Her hands rested still on her lap for several seconds. The giant hall became completely quiet. A few students exchanged amused smiles, expecting an awkward disaster. One even pulled out a phone, ready to secretly record the embarrassing moment. Clara stared at the piano keys. Her breathing felt unsteady. She almost stood up again. But then her fingers finally touched the keys. The first notes were soft, simple, gentle. The younger teacher smirked slightly, clearly unimpressed. Then everything changed. The melody suddenly became deeper and more powerful. Clara's hands moved smoothly across the piano with unbelievable control and emotion. Every note flowed naturally, filling the giant hall with beautiful music that felt alive. The mocking smiles disappeared almost instantly. Students stared in shock. One girl slowly lowered the phone from her hand. Victor stood completely still near the stage. The younger teacher's face lost all confidence. Clara continued playing without looking at anyone. For the first time in years, she forgot the room around her. The music carried sadness, warmth, and strength all at once. It sounded like someone telling the story of an entire lifetime without speaking a single word. The students could feel it. Even those who normally cared only about competitions and grades became silent. One boy whispered quietly, "This can't be real." Another student shook his head in disbelief. Clara's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the piano keys with incredible precision. Yet the performance never felt cold or mechanical. Every note carried emotion. It was the kind of playing that could not be learned from books alone. Came from experience, from pain, from love, from years of silence. A deep stillness filled the room as the final notes slowly faded away. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the hall remained completely silent. Then one student quietly started clapping. Another joined. Soon the entire room exploded into applause. Several students stood from their seats. One girl looked close to tears. The younger teacher stared at Clara with complete disbelief. He looked embarrassed now, unsure what to say after mocking her only minutes earlier. But Clara did not smile proudly. She did not enjoy the attention. In fact, she looked frightened by it. She quickly stood from the piano bench and stepped back. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. Victor looked confused. Sorry? For what? But Clara was already grabbing her cleaning supplies with shaking hands. The students surrounded her with questions. Where did you learn that? Were you a professional pianist? Why are you working here? Can you play again? The sudden attention overwhelmed her completely. I need to work, she said quietly. She hurried toward the exit before anyone could stop her. The students watched her leave in stunned silence. The younger teacher slowly rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, he muttered quietly. I didn't expect that. Victor gave him a cold look. No, he replied. You didn't. The rest of the day felt completely different inside the academy. Whispers spread through every hallway. Students talked non-stop about the mysterious cleaning woman who played like a concert pianist. Some claimed she was once famous. Others believed she secretly studied music for years. A few even exaggerated the story so much that it sounded unreal. Meanwhile, Clara tried to avoid everyone. She cleaned empty classrooms and stayed away from crowded areas whenever possible. But it became impossible to escape the curious stares. For the first time in years, people actually saw her, and Clara was not sure she liked it. Late that evening, after most students had gone home, she sat alone in a small storage room behind the kitchen area. A cup of cold tea rested beside her while she quietly stared at the floor. Her hands still trembled slightly. She never wanted this. Music had once been the most beautiful part of her life, but it also carried memories she worked very hard to bury. The small room remained silent until someone knocked softly on the open door. Clara looked up. Victor stood there holding a folder under his arm. He stepped inside slowly. You frightened half the academy today, he said calmly. Clara looked down again. I didn't mean to. Victor studied her tired face carefully. You have real training, he said. Years of it. Clara remained silent. Victor continued speaking softly now. People don't play like that unless music once meant everything to them. For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then she quietly replied, That was a long time ago. Victor nodded slowly. But before leaving, he said something that made Clara's chest tighten with fear. The academy director wants to meet you tomorrow morning. The room suddenly felt colder. Because deep down, Clara knew her hidden past was no longer safe. Clara barely slept that night. She lay awake in her tiny apartment while rain tapped softly against the window. The room was small and simple, with old furniture and faded walls that showed years of wear. A weak lamp glowed beside the bed while shadows moved quietly across the ceiling. But Clara's mind was somewhere else. The academy director wants to meet you tomorrow morning. Victor's words stayed inside her head all night. For years, she had carefully hidden her past from everyone around her. She worked quietly, avoided attention, and kept her life private. That was safer, easier, because once people started asking questions, painful memories always followed. Clara slowly sat up from the bed and looked toward the old wooden box resting near the corner of the room. After a long pause, she walked over and carefully opened it. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed music papers, and old concert programs from years ago. Some edges were damaged from time, but the memories inside remained painfully clear. One photo showed a younger Clara sitting beside a grand piano in a beautiful concert hall. She looked happy there, confident, full of dreams. Another picture showed her standing beside a man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Clara gently touched the photo with trembling fingers. A deep sadness filled her face. She quickly closed the box again. Some memories were too heavy to revisit for long. The next morning, dark clouds still covered the city when Clara arrived at the academy. The building looked as grand as always, but today it felt different to her. Almost every student seemed to recognize her now. Whispers followed her through the halls. That's her. She's the piano woman. I heard she used to perform professionally. Someone said she studied overseas. Clara kept her eyes low and walked faster. She hated attention. Near the staircase, two younger students smiled politely at her. "Good morning," one of them said kindly. Clara looked surprised for a moment before quietly replying, "Good morning." It had been a long time since students greeted her with respect. But not everyone had changed. As she passed the teacher's lounge, she overheard several voices inside. "This whole thing is ridiculous," one teacher complained. "She plays one emotional piece and suddenly everyone acts like she's a genius." Another voice answered, "Still, you heard her. That wasn't normal." The first teacher scoffed. "Maybe she memorized it years ago." Clara quietly walked past the door without reacting. She had already spent enough years hearing people judge her. Soon, Victor approached her near the hallway. "The director is waiting," he said calmly. Clara nodded silently. Together they walked through the long corridor toward the main office. Students stared as they passed. Some whispered to each other while others simply looked curious. Clara's hands tightened slightly around the handle of her cleaning cart. Victor noticed. "You don't need to be nervous," he said quietly. But Clara knew life rarely brought good surprises. When they reached the office door, Victor gave a soft knock before opening it. The academy director sat behind a large wooden desk covered with papers and music files. He was an older man with silver hair and calm eyes. Beside him stood a younger assistant holding a tablet. The director looked up as Clara entered. "So," he said gently, "you are the woman everyone is talking about." Clara immediately looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble," she replied softly. The director exchanged a brief glance with Victor before speaking again. "No trouble," he said. "Only surprise." He motioned toward a chair. "Please sit." Clara hesitated before carefully sitting near the edge of the chair. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the director leaned forward slightly. "How long have you played piano?" Clara remained quiet. Finally, she answered, "Most of my life." Victor folded his arms. "Why hide it?" Clara lowered her eyes. "Because it belongs to the past." The room became silent again. The director studied her face carefully, almost as if trying to understand the sadness hidden behind her calm expression. Then he asked something unexpected. "Would you play for us again?" Clara looked up immediately. "No," she answered quickly. The director seemed surprised by how fast she refused. "It would only be a private performance." "I can't." Victor spoke gently now. "Yesterday wasn't luck. Everyone heard it." Clara shook her head slowly. "You don't understand." The director leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "Then help us understand." For several seconds, Clara said nothing. Her eyes drifted toward the large window beside the office. Outside, students crossed the courtyard while carrying instruments and music folders. young faces full of ambition and hope. Once she had looked exactly the same. Finally, she whispered, "Music cost me too much." Neither man spoke after hearing that. The sadness in her voice said more than any long explanation could. Before the conversation could continue, loud voices suddenly echoed from outside the office. A few students rushed past the hallway excitedly. The guest judge arrived early. Everyone's gathering in the main hall. The director frowned slightly before standing. "The International Committee is here already?" The assistant nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. They came sooner than expected." The academy immediately became busy and chaotic. Teachers hurried through the corridors while students rushed toward rehearsal rooms. The academy had been preparing for this important visit for weeks. The guest judge was a famous music organizer known for selecting talented performers for international competitions. The director looked toward Victor. "Gather the senior students in the piano hall immediately." Victor nodded and left. The director then turned back toward Clara. Their conversation was clearly unfinished. "You may go for now," he said calmly. "But this matter is not over." Clara quietly nodded before leaving the office. As she stepped into the hallway, the academy buzzed with nervous energy. Teachers adjusted schedules while students practiced rapidly in corners. Clara tried to disappear back into her normal duties. But fate had other plans. Later that afternoon, the piano hall became packed with students, teachers, and academy staff. The guest judge sat near the front row while several top students prepared to perform one after another. Everyone wanted to impress him. Clara quietly cleaned near the side entrance while staying out of sight. The performances began. Some students played beautifully. Others became nervous and made mistakes. The judge remained calm and difficult to impress. Hours passed. Then something unexpected happened. One talented student suddenly froze during a difficult piece. His hands trembled badly before he completely stopped playing. The room became painfully silent. The student looked embarrassed and overwhelmed. One teacher quickly whispered, "Continue," but the boy could not move. Panic filled his face. Then, from near the doorway, a soft voice spoke gently. "Take a breath." Everyone turned. Clara stood quietly holding her cleaning cloth. The student looked confused. Clara gave a small, encouraging nod. "Don't think about the audience," she said softly. "Just follow the music." The room stayed silent. The nervous student slowly looked back at the piano. Then he began again. This time, his playing became calmer and smoother. The piece finally ended successfully. A few students quietly clapped supportively. But the guest judge looked more interested in Clara than the performance itself. He leaned slightly toward the director. "Who is she?" he asked. The director hesitated. Before he could answer, one of the younger teachers laughed awkwardly. "Our cleaning assistant," he explained quickly. But the judge continued staring toward Clara. "She speaks like a performer." The younger teacher forced a smile. "Well, there's actually something unusual about her." Several students immediately became excited. Whispers spread again through the room. The younger teacher looked nervous now but continued speaking anyway. "She played here yesterday," he admitted, "and surprised everyone." The judge raised an eyebrow with interest. "Is that true?" The entire hall suddenly focused on Clara again. She immediately stepped back. "No," she said softly. "Please continue with the students." But the guest judge smiled slightly. "I would very much like to hear you play." Clara's heart dropped. The room waited silently for her answer. She looked around nervously at all the staring faces. Teachers, students, the director, Victor, the famous guest judge. For years, she had hidden from exactly this moment. But now there was nowhere left to run. Clara slowly looked toward the grand piano standing under the bright stage lights. And deep inside, she realized her secret life was finally beginning to surface in front of everyone. The piano hall became completely silent after the guest judge asked Clara to play. Dozens of eyes followed her every movement. Students leaned forward in their seats with excitement. Teachers exchanged curious looks. Even the academy director seemed unsure what would happen next. Clara stood frozen near the doorway, still holding her cleaning cloth tightly in one hand. "I can't," she said softly. But the guest judge smiled kindly instead of looking disappointed. "Music should never be hidden," he replied calmly. Those words touched something deep inside her. For years, Clara had done exactly that. She had buried music deep inside herself like an old memory she was afraid to revisit. The director stepped closer. "No one is forcing you," he said gently. "But perhaps this is your chance to stop running from it." Clara lowered her eyes. She wanted to leave the room. She wanted to disappear back into the quiet life she understood. Cleaning empty halls felt much safer than standing in front of people again. But another part of her felt tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of pretending music meant nothing to her. The hall remained silent while everyone waited. Finally, after a long moment, Clara slowly walked toward the stage. Soft whispers immediately spread through the room. "She's really going to play. I still can't believe this. Who is she?" Clara ignored the voices and sat carefully at the piano bench. The bright stage lights felt uncomfortable after so many years away from attention. Her hands rested quietly on her lap while she stared at the piano keys. Memories rushed through her mind again. Concert halls. Applause. Long nights practicing until her fingers hurt. Then came darker memories. Hospital rooms. Bills she could not afford. Lonely nights filled with silence after losing everything she once loved. Clara closed her eyes briefly. When she finally touched the keys, the first notes sounded soft and fragile. The room immediately became still. The melody slowly grew stronger, filling the hall with deep emotion. It was not just skill people heard this time. It was pain, hope, regret, love. Every note felt personal, like pieces of her life hidden inside the music. Students sat frozen in silence. Several teachers who once mocked her could barely look away. Even the younger teacher who had laughed at her days earlier now looked ashamed. The guest judge listened carefully without moving. As Clara continued playing, something changed inside her. The fear slowly disappeared. Her hands moved naturally, almost like they remembered a life she had tried hard to forget. The piano no longer felt like an instrument, felt like home. The final notes faded gently across the hall. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the audience burst into applause louder than before. Some students stood up immediately. Others looked emotional. One girl quietly wiped tears from her eyes. The guest judge slowly rose from his seat while clapping. "That," he said softly, "was extraordinary." Clara immediately stood from the piano bench, uncomfortable with the attention again. But before she could leave, the guest judge asked something unexpected. "What happened to your career?" The question hit Clara like cold wind. The applause slowly faded. The room grew quiet again. Clara looked down at the floor. "I left that life behind," she answered quietly. The judge studied her face carefully. "People do not play like that unless they once lived for music." Clara remained silent. The director finally stepped in. "Perhaps this conversation should happen privately." The judge nodded respectfully. Soon the students were dismissed, though excited whispers filled every hallway afterward. Nobody could stop talking about the mysterious cleaning woman who played like a world-class pianist. Meanwhile, Clara followed the director, Victor, and the guest judge into a private meeting room. The atmosphere felt calmer there. Rain softly tapped against the windows while warm lights filled the room. The director offered Clara tea, but she barely touched it. The guest judge sat across from her quietly. "I apologize if my question felt personal," he said kindly. "But your music carries a story." Clara stared at the untouched teacup. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Victor said gently, "You don't have to explain anything if you don't want to." Clara took a slow breath. "No," she whispered. "Maybe it's time." The room stayed completely silent. Clara folded her hands together tightly before finally speaking. "Many years ago, music was my whole life." Her voice sounded distant, almost as if she were speaking about someone else. "I studied piano from childhood. My parents were poor, but they sacrificed everything for my lessons. By the time I was 20, I was already performing in large concert halls. The guest judge listened carefully. Clara continued, I traveled often. Competitions, performances, interviews. People said I had a bright future. A small sad smile crossed her face. At that time, I believed life would always stay beautiful. But her expression darkened again. Then I met someone. Victor noticed warmth briefly return to her eyes while speaking those words. He was kind, Clara said softly. He never cared about fame or money. He only cared whether I was happy. She paused. We built a simple life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. The room remained quiet except for the rain outside. Then Clara's voice became weaker. One winter evening, he was driving home during a storm. She stopped speaking for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly now. The accident happened only a few streets away from our apartment. Nobody interrupted her. The sadness in the room felt heavy. Clara looked toward the window. I remember waiting for him that night, she whispered. I kept checking the clock because dinner was getting cold. Victor lowered his eyes quietly. Clara forced herself to continue. After he died, everything changed. The bright memories of concerts and success suddenly disappeared from her voice. I stopped performing for months. Then debts started growing. Medical bills from before the accident. Rent. Expenses. I tried returning to music, but every performance reminded me of him. Tears slowly filled her eyes, though she tried hiding them. I would sit at the piano and suddenly forget how to breathe. The guest judge remained silent, giving her space to continue. Clara took another slow breath. Eventually the invitations stopped coming. Younger performers replaced me. Audiences forgot my name. She gave a weak smile filled with sadness. That happens quickly in the music world. The director quietly shook his head. But you still had extraordinary talent. Clara nodded faintly. Yes, but talent doesn't protect people from grief. Those words left the room completely silent. After a moment, Clara continued speaking softly. I needed work. Any work. So I took cleaning jobs. Small ones at first. Then eventually here. Victor looked stunned. You worked here all these years without anyone knowing? Clara nodded. It was easier that way. The younger teacher's cruel comment from earlier echoed painfully in her memory again. People should know their place. Clara had spent years believing maybe he was right. Maybe her place no longer belonged on a stage. The guest judge leaned forward slightly. Why hide from music completely? He asked gently. Clara looked toward her hands. Because music remembered everything I wanted to forget. The answer broke something inside the room. Even the director seemed emotional now. For years, students and teachers had walked past this quiet woman without knowing the pain she carried silently every day. Finally, Victor spoke. You shouldn't be cleaning hallways. Clara immediately shook her head. There is dignity in honest work, she said softly. Victor nodded respectfully. Yes, but your gift still matters. The guest judge agreed. People spend entire lifetimes chasing the kind of emotion you bring to music naturally. Clara looked overwhelmed by all the attention again. I'm too old to start over. The guest judge smiled gently. Music does not care about age. Outside the meeting room, the academy slowly became quiet as evening approached. But inside, something important had changed. For the first time in years, Clara had finally spoken honestly about her past. And the people who once saw only a humble cleaning woman were beginning to understand the extraordinary life hidden behind her silence. Before leaving the room, the guest judge paused near the door. Then he turned back toward Clara. There will be a public concert here next month, he said calmly. The director looked surprised. The judge continued speaking. I would like her to perform. Clara's face immediately filled with fear again. But deep inside, another feeling quietly appeared beneath the fear. A feeling she had not allowed herself to feel in many years. Hope. Clara did not answer the guest judge immediately after he suggested the public concert. The room stayed quiet while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Concert. The word alone filled her chest with both fear and emotion. For years, she had avoided stages, crowds, and applause. She convinced herself that part of her life was gone forever. Returning now felt impossible. "I can't do that," she finally whispered. The guest judge looked calm. "Why not?" Clara lowered her eyes. "Because people expect too much from performers," she said softly. "And sometimes life changes you too much to return." Victor leaned forward slightly. "But when you play, you become alive again." Those words stayed in the room. Clara did not know how to answer them because deep inside, she knew they were true. The director spoke carefully now. "No one is asking you to become famous again," he said. "This concert could simply be a chance to share your gift." Clara looked exhausted from the conversation already. For so many years, she had carried her grief quietly and alone. Suddenly having people believe in her again felt almost frightening. The guest judge stood from his chair. "Think about it," he said kindly. "You don't need to decide tonight." Before leaving, he paused near the door and smiled gently. "But some gifts are too beautiful to stay hidden forever." After he left, silence filled the room again. Clara stared down at her hands. Victor finally spoke softly. "You don't have to fear music." Clara gave a weak smile. "I'm not afraid of music," she replied quietly. Victor looked confused. "Then what are you afraid of?" Clara's eyes slowly filled with sadness. "Feeling everything again." That answer stayed with Victor long after she left the room. The following days felt strange inside the academy. Clara was no longer invisible. Students greeted her in the hallways now. Some even asked for advice during practice breaks. At first, she tried avoiding those conversations, but little by little, something inside her softened. One afternoon, a nervous young student sat alone near the piano hall looking frustrated after another failed rehearsal. Clara quietly passed by with her cleaning cart before stopping. "You're pressing too hard," she said gently. The student looked surprised. "What?" "The piano," Clara explained softly. "You're trying to control it instead of listening to it." The student looked embarrassed. "I keep messing up during the emotional part." Clara slowly walked closer. "Because you're thinking about mistakes instead of the feeling behind the music." The student stared at her quietly. After a moment, Clara sat beside the piano and played a few soft notes. "Music is like speaking honestly," she said. "People can hear when your heart is absent." The student listened carefully. That short moment changed everything. Soon other students started asking Clara questions too. "How do you stay calm while playing? How do you remember difficult pieces? How do you make music feel emotional?" At first, Clara answered briefly, but over time she began opening up more naturally. To everyone's surprise, her teaching style felt completely different from the strict methods many academy teachers used. She never shouted, never humiliated students for mistakes. Instead, she listened. And because she understood pain herself, students felt comfortable around her. Word slowly spread through the academy that students were secretly learning more from the cleaning woman than from some professional teachers. Not everyone liked that. One afternoon, the younger teacher who once mocked Clara watched several students gathered around her near the piano hall. She was helping a nervous girl prepare for rehearsal. "Stop apologizing after every mistake," Clara told her kindly. "Confidence matters as much as skill." The younger teacher crossed his arms from across the room. "This is becoming inappropriate," he muttered. Victor happened to overhear him. "Inappropriate?" Victor asked calmly. "She's staff," the younger teacher replied. "Now students treat her like faculty." Victor looked directly at him. "Perhaps respect should be earned through character instead of titles." The younger teacher fell silent immediately. Deep down, many teachers now felt embarrassed by how poorly they had treated Clara before learning about her talent. But Clara herself never acted proud or arrogant. She still arrived early every morning, still cleaned classrooms, still carried her old gray bag through the side entrance. The only difference was the way people looked at her now. One evening, the academy director approached her while she cleaned the empty concert hall. "You're still thinking about the concert," he said. Clara nodded faintly. The director sat quietly in the front row seats. You know, he said softly, students here practice every day hoping to move people with music. Clara continued wiping the piano carefully. But when you played, he continued, people forgot about competition and technique. They simply felt something real. Clara remained silent for a moment. Then she asked quietly, what if I fail? The director smiled gently. After everything life already put you through, I doubt one concert can defeat you. Those words stayed with her. Later that night, Clara returned home carrying groceries through the cold streets. The city lights reflected softly on the wet sidewalks after evening rain. As she unlocked her apartment door, her eyes immediately landed on the old wooden box again. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Then slowly, she opened it. Inside rested the memories she had hidden for years. Old photographs, concert programs, a faded newspaper clipping showing her younger self beside a grand piano. And at the very bottom lay a letter written by her late husband many years earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The paper had become old and fragile with time. She quietly read the familiar words again. You were born to play. Even on your darkest days, music will always find its way back to you. Tears slowly filled her eyes. For years, she avoided reading that letter because it hurt too much. But tonight, the pain felt different. Softer somehow. Almost comforting. Clara carefully folded the letter again and looked toward the small piano keyboard resting near the corner of her apartment. Dust covered it from years without use. She slowly walked toward it. Then, for the first time in a very long time, she sat down willingly instead of avoiding it. Her fingers touched the keys gently. A quiet melody filled the small apartment. Not sad this time. Not broken. Just honest. Across the academy, preparations for the upcoming public concert had already begun. Posters were being designed. Important guests were invited. Students talked excitedly about the mysterious woman who would perform. But Clara still had not officially agreed. Days passed. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. The younger teacher who once humiliated her approached while she organized cleaning supplies near the hallway. He looked uncomfortable. Can we talk? He asked quietly. Clara looked surprised but nodded. For a few seconds he struggled to speak. Finally he sighed. I was cruel to you, he admitted. Before all this, I judged you. Clara stayed silent. I thought talent only belonged to people with status, he continued. I was wrong. The apology sounded genuine. Clara looked at him calmly. People often judge what they don't understand, she replied softly. The teacher lowered his eyes. You should accept the concert, he said quietly before walking away. Clara stood there thinking for a long time afterward. That evening, she entered the grand piano hall again after everyone had gone home. The giant room felt peaceful under the dim lights. She slowly walked toward the stage. Then she noticed someone sitting quietly in the front row. Victor. He smiled faintly. I had a feeling you'd come here. Clara looked toward the piano. I still don't know if I can do it. Victor leaned back in his chair. Do you know why students connect with you? He asked. Clara shook her head slightly. Because you understand life beyond music, Victor answered. Most performers only play notes. You play truth. The room became silent again. Clara slowly sat at the piano bench. Victor watched quietly while she touched the keys. Then he asked softly, if your husband were here right now, what would he tell you? Clara stopped moving. Tears quietly filled her eyes again. After a long silence, she whispered the answer almost to herself. He would tell me not to hide anymore. Victor smiled gently. Then maybe it's time to listen. Clara looked down at the piano keys for several seconds. Then finally, for the first time since this strange journey began, she made peace with the fear inside her. And quietly, almost like a promise to herself, she said the words Victor had been hoping to hear. I'll do the concert. The night of the concert finally arrived. The music academy looked completely different from usual. Bright golden lights shined across the building, and expensive cars lined the streets outside. Guests from different cities slowly filled the entrance while reporters stood near the front steps speaking excitedly into cameras. Inside the academy, students hurried through the hallways wearing formal clothes while teachers checked schedules and seating arrangements. Everyone was nervous, but no one felt more nervous than Clara. She stood quietly inside a small dressing room near the concert hall, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She wore a simple dark dress the academy had prepared for her. Her hair was neatly tied back, and for the first time in many years, she looked like the concert pianist she once used to be. Still, fear remained inside her chest. Her hands trembled slightly while she adjusted the sleeves of her dress. A soft knock came from the door. "Come in," she whispered. Victor stepped inside carrying a small cup of tea. "You haven't touched your dinner," he said gently. Clara gave a nervous smile. "I don't think I could eat tonight even if I tried." Victor handed her the tea before sitting nearby. Outside the room, distant voices and music echoed through the busy hallways. "The hall is completely full," Victor said quietly. "Some people are even standing because there aren't enough seats." Clara lowered her eyes. "That makes this worse." Victor smiled faintly. "No, it means people are ready to hear something real." Clara held the warm cup carefully between her hands. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she quietly admitted something she had hidden from everyone. "I almost left this morning." Victor looked surprised. "I packed my bag before sunrise," she continued softly. "Part of me still wanted to disappear." Victor listened carefully. "But then I remembered something," Clara said. She reached into her small purse and carefully removed the old folded letter from her husband. Victor immediately understood. Clara smiled sadly while looking at it. "He always believed I belonged on a stage more than I ever did." Her eyes became emotional. "For years, I thought avoiding music would protect me from pain. But all it really did was make me feel empty." Victor nodded slowly. "Sometimes the things that hurt us are also the things that heal us." Before Clara could answer, another knock interrupted them. The academy director stepped inside. "It's time," he said softly. Clara's heartbeat instantly became faster. The moment she had feared for years was finally here. Victor stood and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone tonight," he said. Clara took one slow breath before standing. Then together they walked toward the concert hall. The sound of the audience grew louder with every step. Clara could hear hundreds of voices beyond the doors. Important guests, music critics, students, reporters, and strangers filled the hall waiting to see the mysterious woman everyone had been talking about for weeks. As they reached the backstage area, Clara stopped walking for a moment. Her fear returned suddenly. "What if I freeze?" she whispered. Victor looked at her calmly. "Then play the first note anyway." Those simple words somehow helped. The academy director walked onto the stage first. The audience slowly became quiet as the lights dimmed. "Good evening," he began warmly. "Tonight is a special night for our academy." Clara waited backstage while listening. The director spoke briefly about music, second chances, and hidden talent. Then finally he smiled toward the audience. Tonight's performer once walked these halls unnoticed. Many people judged her without understanding her story. But true talent does not disappear simply because life becomes difficult. The audience listened silently. And tonight, we are honored to welcome someone whose music reminds us all why art matters in the first place. He turned toward backstage. "Please welcome Clara." For a second, the hall became completely silent. Then applause slowly began spreading across the room. Clara stepped onto the stage. Bright lights immediately covered her vision. Hundreds of faces stared toward her. Some looked curious, others emotional. A few reporters quickly lifted cameras. But Clara focused only on the piano waiting quietly at the center of the stage. As she walked toward it, memories flooded her mind again. Her first concert as a teenager. The proud smile on her parents' faces. The nights she practiced until sunrise. Her husband sitting in the front row during performances, always clapping the loudest. All those memories walked beside her now. Clara sat carefully at the piano bench. The giant hall became completely silent. For several seconds, she simply stared at the keys. Her breathing felt uneven. The fear was still there, but something else was stronger now. Acceptance. Clara slowly placed her fingers on the piano. Then she began to play. The first melody floated gently across the hall like a quiet conversation. Soft, emotional, honest. The audience immediately became still. As the music continued, Clara stopped noticing the crowd around her. The nervousness slowly disappeared with every note. Her hands moved naturally across the keys. Filled with confidence, she thought she had lost forever. The music carried years of emotion inside it. Pain, love, loss, hope. Everything she had hidden for so long finally poured into the performance. Several students in the audience watched with tears in their eyes. Victor sat quietly near the front row, unable to look away. Even the younger teacher who once mocked her looked deeply ashamed now. He remembered every cruel joke he had made. Every moment he treated her like she was unimportant. Now he realized how wrong he had been. The music grew stronger, more powerful. Every note seemed to fill the hall completely. Some audience members closed their eyes while listening. Others held back tears. One elderly woman quietly whispered, "This is beautiful." Near the back row, reporters stopped writing notes and simply listened. Because this performance no longer felt like entertainment. It felt human. Clara's fingers danced across the piano with incredible emotion and control. Yet nothing about the performance felt cold or perfect in a mechanical way. That was what moved people most. Her music carried real life inside it, and everyone could feel it. As the final part of the piece approached, Clara's eyes slowly filled with tears. But this time, they were not tears of pain alone. For the first time in many years, she no longer felt broken sitting behind a piano. She felt whole again. The final notes echoed softly across the hall before fading into silence. And then nothing moved. The audience sat frozen for several seconds, almost like nobody wanted the moment to end. Then suddenly, the entire hall exploded into applause. People stood from their seats immediately. The standing ovation became louder and louder. Some students were openly crying now. Teachers clapped proudly. Even important music critics stood applauding with genuine emotion. Clara sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the reaction around her. She had spent years believing the world forgot her. But in this moment, none of that mattered anymore. Victor slowly wiped his eyes while smiling. The academy director looked deeply emotional. And the guest judge who first encouraged her to return simply nodded proudly from the front row. The applause continued for nearly several minutes. Finally, Clara stood from the piano bench. Her eyes searched the audience quietly. Then they stopped near the empty seat Victor had reserved beside him earlier that evening. A seat meant for the person who could not be there anymore. Her husband. A small emotional smile crossed her face. Deep inside, she felt as though he had listened to every note. The audience continued clapping while Clara bowed her head respectfully. But the most important thing had already happened long before the applause. The humble woman once mocked and ignored inside these same halls had finally stopped hiding from herself. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that true greatness is not always loud, rich, or famous. Sometimes it quietly walks beside us every day carrying invisible pain, waiting for someone to finally see it clearly. After the concert ended, students rushed toward Clara backstage. Some hugged her emotionally. Others thanked her for inspiring them. One nervous young student quietly admitted, "I was thinking about quitting music before hearing you tonight." Clara smiled gently. "Don't quit because of fear," she replied softly. "Fear disappears faster than regret." Even several teachers approached to apologize sincerely for how they once treated her. But Clara no longer carried anger toward them. Life had already taught her how heavy bitterness could become. Later that night, after most guests had left and the academy slowly became quiet again, Clara returned alone to the empty concert hall. The lights were dim now. The giant room sat peaceful and silent once more. She slowly walked toward the piano one last time and touched it gently. Then she smiled softly to herself. Because for the first time in many years, the piano no longer reminded her only of loss. Now it reminded her that even after the darkest years, life could still surprise people with unexpected second chances.